Hello everyone, so welcome back. So this is your first chapter videos for principles of microeconomics. Again, I'm your instructor. My name is Norman. So in this chapter, we are going to talk about the 10 fundamental principles of economics. Well, we have to first understand what's the study of economics before we talk about the principles, because the principles actually help us to understand the study of economics. They help us to understand the foundations of these subjects. But the study of economics, it's actually about a bigger, more general questions that we arise from the beginnings in this society. Well, any society needs the study of economics because the fact that the economic study actually helps to answer questions of what kind of policy should be implemented in the country, how the businesses should allocate their money, how people should spend their time at work. So it's related to our everyday life. Well, a lot of economic books actually talks about the study of economics. It explains what is economics. But in general, the study of economics, it's all about how people or society allocate what we call the scarce resources. Well, the term scarce basically have two very important conditions to actually refer to our real life. So when we talk about the scarce resources, not only the resources, the natural resources or any kinds of resources like time or efforts, it's limited. But also the term scarce also refer to this scarce, very limited resources has this tremendous amount of needs and demand in the society. So that means, well, the resources that we refer to, not only it's limited in quantity, but also a lot of people, a lot of different agencies in the economy actually needs it. The more we get, the better we are. That makes those resources scarce. Well, this is the very fundamental ideas of economics, how this study will relate to our everyday life. Because, well, think about it. Well, you have to make decisions every day because you face these scarce resources. You have to think about how you get to school every day. Well, are you going to walk to spend more time, but you don't have to spend much money? You have to make decisions every day, well, whether you spend your time on studying your math exam or your economic exams. You have to decide, well, how are you going to spend your time today? Are you going to watch a movie with your friends today? Or are you going back to home and spend some time with your families? And even more, when you get out of school, you have to determine with the skills you have, well, what kind of job you're going to get. If someone offers you an accounting job as comparing to there's another company offering you a management job. So you have to make decisions every day because you face these difficult questions of scarce resources. And in economics, we are trying to find answers to answer those questions. Well, I have mentioned several times already, we are forced to make decisions. So, the fundamental principles of economics actually directly related to how people making decisions. Well, there are four fundamental principles that actually help explaining the decisions of individuals or people in general. Again, well, it's not required for students to understand all 10 principles in this class immediately in chapter 1. I'm going to use some very simple ideas and some very simple example to try to get you understand the ideas of these principles, or what this principle is about. And later, in each chapter, we are going to dig out a little bit more about each principle. And hopefully by the end of the semester, you will get a better sense of these 10 principles and how those principles actually help us to answer the questions. Well, the first principle we are going to learn in the textbook, it's what we call trade-offs. So trade-off basically means whatever decisions we make, we will always getting something in return, and at the same time, we have to give up something else. It's hardly be the case when you decided to go to a movie with your friend today, and you will still get the same time to spend with your family. It's hardly for you to actually spend that $100 bill in your pockets today to buy a game that you are able to spend that same $100 to buy a very fancy dinner with your girlfriends or boyfriend tonight. Whenever we decide on something, we have planned an activities, we decided to devote those resources on an activities, well, those resources cannot be used or applied to other activities in our life. So the trade-off basically illustrates how society actually determines what we're getting and what we have to give up. So there's always a trade-off in our decision making, and that is one very important principle. Well, not only we do this trade-offs every day, but the society also do that too. And one example that I would like to mention today about the trade-off is the progressive tax system in the United States. And most of the people you know, we have this progressive tax system in our country. And this tax system actually refers to the richest people in the country will be paying a higher tax rate as comparing to a lower income families. So why are we doing this? Well, later we are going to discover more, but then at least get a sense, well, even a country like us, the United States, one of the wealthiest country, we're still actually facing these trade-offs. Well, what kind of trade-off we are talking about? Well, this is a trade-off that we always bring it up to the table. It's a trade-off between equity and efficiency. So the problem of this progressive tax system, a lot of people actually argued, the government actually taking a higher tax rate from the wealthiest people in the country. So the wealthiest people will have to pay a higher tax rates, so more money goes into the government's hands by tax as compared to the poor or the lower income. Well, at the end of the day, the governments will collect all this money and they will be allocated. They will redistribute this income back to the society. Well, they're not going to keep it, right? Because the job of the government is not to earn profits, but the job of the government is to make the society more equal. So at the end of the day, you have seen a lot of government programs like social welfare programs, the unemployment programs, other social programs that they put into the community. Well, those money will be spent into the society, and sometimes the money will go directly back to the low-income family. So this redistributions of income from this progressive tax system, it's considered to be a policy that actually trying to achieve more equal income society. Well, while we are doing that, right, we're trying to achieve that goal, well, unfortunately, we have to give up some what we call efficiency. So that means, well, the richest people, even though they work hard, even though they are more highly educated, even though they spend more effort at their work, but the level of incomes at the end of the day they earn might still be very similar to the poor. Well, it actually takes out this incentive for the smart people or the rich people to actually work harder to engage more to the work. So we are losing some of those talents at the workplace if the progressive system is actually going too far. Well, this is a trade-off we always see in the society like us. We're trying to promote equity, but at the same time, we know we have to give up some efficiency. Just like how you think about your personal day, when you choose to take bus to the school, well, unfortunately, you cannot spend the same resources like money and time and efforts to walk back to school because you have already picked one and you cannot pick the other ones in your life. So that's a trade-off. Well, another principle that actually closely related to the trade-off, it's what we call opportunity cost. So the opportunity cost actually is a term that we use a lot to try to illustrate the cost for making certain decisions. We know we have to give up something, but we have to actually consider, well, what are we getting back in return, the benefits that we receive? Does it actually justify with the cost that we paid out, what we give up? So opportunity cost basically refer to this idea of cost for making a decisions. Well, there's a very classic examples that we can use to describe this kind of situations. So a lot of people like you guys, you come to the school, the college, higher educations to study, but you don't come here for free. Well, there are a lot of things that you have to give up in your life. There are trade-offs in making a decision coming to college. But at the same time, you're paying tuition too. So for example, if I give you some number, let's say, well, you can actually work for a part-time jobs that pays you $20,000 annual salary. But you give up not to work, and you come to school and pay a total annual tuitions of $30,000. So think about this decisions here. You're coming to school, you're paying that $30,000. Well, that is not just the cost you pay. Because at the same time, you know that you have to give up your job to spend your time in school to study. So in this case, the total cost for making that decision is coming to college is the sum of what you give up, which is the $20,000 of annual salary, plus the $30,000 tuitions that you pay. Because, well, those $30,000 you can also use to buy something else in your life. You give up that opportunity. Well, there are a lot of other examples of opportunity cost, but just want to give you an idea when we try to talk about the term opportunity cost. We have a very, very accurate definitions of these terms. So the opportunity cost for any decisions making is the second best alternatives in our life. So that means when you make a decision to do something, you know you have to give up so many things in your life that you can possibly do, but what we consider to be the opportunity cost for making a decision is what you will do next if you are not going to do what you're currently doing. Well, give you an example, very simple example again. Well, let's say there are 4 foods actually put on the table for you guys to choose. You have apples, you have orange, you have bananas, you have pineapples. Well, my favorite food, it's always apple. So let's say, well, I choose to eat apples. And someone asks me, so what is the opportunity cost for you to pick this apple? Then I have to actually consider, well, what is my next best alternatives? Let's suppose if pineapples, it's what I will pick next if I'm not choosing apple. Then my opportunity cost for choosing the apple today is not choosing the pineapple. Because I know I have to always pick one out of the 4. When I'm not picking apple, I cannot choose all the 3 that left on the table. I can only pick one more. So the opportunity costs actually have these definitions of the next best alternatives in life. And later we are going to explore more. Well, also, people making decisions, they have to actually make a wise decisions. And how to be a rational decision making depends on this third principles here, what we call think at the margins. Well, there are a lot of people actually confused about this term marginals. And we will learn a lot about these terms marginals later because, well, there are a lot of principles and concepts and topics that relates to this marginal concept. But for now, well, let me just give you one very simple example here. Let's suppose I have this student here trying to study for an exam. Let's say, well, this guy named Thomas. So he is going to think about, well, how much time I should devote on this upcoming exam in the afternoon. So let's suppose Thomas has these choices. So he woke up at 8 a.m. He can continue to study until noontime, which is when the exam happens. Well, at 8 a.m., he just woke up. He cannot study any of the materials, let's say 0 pages that he can actually study. If Thomas spent 1 whole hour to study for this subject, he can get through 20 total pages. If he goes on to study 1 extra hour, he can study total of 35 pages. And if he keep going on, 45 pages total, and until noontime, he can possibly read through total of 50 pages. Now the problem is, well, I don't really get how Thomas can benefit from each hour of study. The only thing I know from this number here is, well, you know what? If Thomas keeps studying, he can get through 50 pages. But what's the cost? And what's the benefits? Well, let's suppose if we are trying to find out, well, what is the additional benefits for Thomas to study for this exam in each hour, we have to find something that we call marginal benefits. And the marginal benefits, the term marginal basically means additional. So we want to find out by studying 1 additional hour, how many additional pages Thomas can get out. In the first hour, he can actually get 20 additional pages done. And in the second hour, from 9 to 10, well, maybe he's getting tired. So he can only get additional 15 pages done. And if you keep going and going from 10 to 11, the third hour, the second hour, and third hour, we can get 10 additional. And at last, 5 additionals. And let's suppose if Thomas really trying to consider, well, does it worth it, right, to keep studying 1 more hour, or 50 more minutes, or 30 more minutes? Well, Thomas always have to consider what are the additional pages that he can get out from that 1 additional hours of effort. Remember, time and effort is scarce resources. So Thomas will never actually continue to contribute those times in his life to study. So he has to find out, well, what is the additional benefits he could possibly receive to consider when he should stop. Ask yourself these questions. You also face the same problem too. So a rational person will always make decisions based on marginal. We always consider what are the marginal benefits we can get, and we are going to justify with the additional cost, the marginal cost for studying in the exam. Well, at last, the fourth principle that explains people decisions making is people always respond to incentive. And the word incentive is quite tricky because most of the time, incentive, it feels like a positive thing to us. But sometimes it could be negative too. Especially policy. The government should always keep in mind that people making the decisions, it's based on what the incentive given to them. Well, there are a lot of examples. You can actually read it from the book, but one particular example that I would like to remind you, well, think about tax. Tax is a policy that actually provides incentive for people to either buy less or more of a product. Think about cigarettes. The government's always trying to put a very heavy tax on cigarette products. And the reason is why? Well, you may already know. Because they do not want people to smoke. They want people to quit smoking. And the government is trying to provide that incentive for people to quit smoking by putting a heavier tax on the products. When people have to pay higher amounts of money for their products, well, they will buy less. So, those are the 4 fundamental principles that explain individuals' decision making. We are going to go over other principles that ties into how the society interacts, how people interact with each other in the society, and also talk about how the whole economy actually runs.